Picture this. You're a young woman living alone on the brutal frontier, and you find a stranger bleeding to death on your doorstep. Your heart tells you to save him, but your head whispers a warning. This man is dangerous. Then you discover he's worth $5,000 dead or alive, and suddenly your choice becomes a matter of life, death, and a love that could destroy you both. That's exactly what happened to Elena Rodriguez on a blood-soaked morning in Deadwood Gulch, Arizona territory, when she made the decision that would change her life forever. But this isn't just another story of a woman falling for the wrong man. This is the tale of two souls caught between justice and mercy, between duty and desire, and between a love powerful enough to redeem the darkest heart and a past violent enough to destroy them both. Elena thought she knew what she wanted from life: to honor her father's memory by healing the sick and wounded in a lawless land where doctors were scarcer than water in the desert. She'd spent 3 years building her reputation as the territory's most skilled healer, a woman who could pull men back from death's door with nothing but steady hands and unwavering determination. She treated everyone who came to her, cowboys and shopkeepers, ranchers and drifters, without asking questions about their past or their sins. But she'd never treated a man like Cord Maverick. When she found him collapsed against her cabin door, an Apache arrow buried deep between his shoulder blades and his life bleeding out into the dust, Elena saw only another human being in desperate need. She didn't see the calloused hands that had drawn faster than lightning, or the scars that told stories of violence and vengeance. She didn't notice the predatory stillness that marked him as one of the most dangerous men in the territory. All she saw was pain, and Elena Rodriguez had devoted her life to healing pain wherever she found it. What she couldn't know was that the man she was risking everything to save was Cord Iron Wolf Maverick, the outlaw whose face graced wanted posters from California to Texas, the gunfighter who'd killed 7 men in fair fights and was blamed for a dozen more, the fugitive with a $5,000 bounty that had every lawman and bounty hunter west of the Mississippi hunting him like a rabid dog. She couldn't know that by saving his life, she was putting her own in mortal danger. She couldn't know that 3 different groups of armed men were already converging on Deadwood Gulch, following a trail of blood and rumors that would lead them straight to her door. And she definitely couldn't know that somewhere between extracting that arrow and nursing him back to health, she would lose her heart to the most wanted man in the American West. Because when Elena Rodriguez made the choice to heal rather than turn away, she had no idea she was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous outlaws make the most devoted protectors, and sometimes the most wanted men are the ones most worthy of love. The sun was barely cresting the red mesa when Elena Rodriguez heard the sound that would change her life forever: the heavy thud of a body hitting her front door. She'd been grinding willow bark for pain medicine, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to prepare for emergencies before they arrived. Living alone in the Arizona territory meant being ready for anything: Apache raids, rattlesnake bites, gunshot wounds, or any of the 100 ways the frontier could try to kill a person. As the only trained healer within 50 miles of Deadwood Gulch, Elena had seen it all, but nothing had prepared her for the sight that greeted her when she opened her cabin door. A man lay crumpled against the wooden frame, his face pressed into the dust, blood seeping through his shirt and pooling beneath him. An Apache arrow protruded from his back, its feathered shaft rising from between his shoulder blades like a grim flag of surrender. His breathing was shallow and labored, each exhale stirring the dirt beneath his face. Elena's medical training kicked in immediately, overriding the shock and fear that threatened to freeze her in place. She dropped to her knees beside him, her fingers automatically finding the pulse at his neck. Weak but steady. His skin was hot with fever, but clammy with blood loss, a dangerous combination that told her he didn't have much time. "Can you hear me?" she asked, gently turning his head so his face wasn't buried in the dirt. "I'm going to help you." The man's eyes fluttered open, steel gray eyes that seemed to look right through her, even in his semi-conscious state. His lips moved slightly, but no sound came out except a low groan of pain. Elena made her decision in that instant. Whatever this man had done, wherever he'd come from, right now he was just another human being who would die without her help. And Elena Rodriguez had never turned away from someone in need, no matter how dangerous they might be. "I need to get you inside," she said. though she wasn't sure he could understand her. "This is going to hurt, but I have to move you." Getting a full-grown man who was dead weight into her cabin should have been impossible for someone of Elena's size, but desperation and determination gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. She managed to drag him across the threshold and onto the thick rug in front of her fireplace, leaving a trail of blood that she'd worry about cleaning later. The arrow was the immediate problem. It had penetrated deep, missing his heart and lungs by what looked like mere inches. The shaft was buried so deeply that only about 6 inches protruded from his back, and Elena could see that the arrowhead had gone completely through. The tip was just barely visible, pressing against the skin of his chest. She'd removed arrows before, but never one buried this deep in such a dangerous location. One wrong move could sever an artery or puncture a lung. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered her instruments. A sharp knife, metal forceps, clean cloth for bandages, and a bottle of whiskey that would have to serve as both anesthetic and disinfectant. The man drifted in and out of consciousness as she worked, sometimes gritting his teeth against the pain, sometimes falling completely limp. Elena found herself talking to him as she worked, partly to keep him conscious and partly to calm her own nerves. "You're lucky the arrow didn't hit anything vital," she murmured, carefully cleaning the blood away from the wound site. "Though I suppose luck is relative when you're lying on a stranger's floor with Apache steel in your back." She had to cut his shirt away to get better access to the wound, revealing a torso that told its own story of violence. Old scars crisscrossed his chest and shoulders, some from knives, others that looked like bullet wounds. This was a man who'd lived a hard life, who'd survived things that would have killed lesser men. But it was the tattoo on his left shoulder that made Elena's breath catch. A wolf's head, intricately detailed and surrounded by barbed wire. The kind of marking that spoke of affiliations she'd rather not think about. "Focus," she told herself. "Whatever he's done, wherever he's been, right now he needs a doctor, not a judge." The extraction took nearly an hour. Elena had to widen the entry wound slightly to get a good grip on the arrow shaft, then carefully work it back through the tissue, watching for any sign that she was causing more damage than she was preventing. The man gritted his teeth and gripped the rug beneath him so hard his knuckles went white, but he never cried out. When the arrow finally came free with a wet, sucking sound, Elena felt a rush of relief so strong it made her dizzy. The man's breathing immediately became easier, and some of the gray pallor left his face. "The worst is over," she told him, pressing clean cloth against both the entry and exit wounds to control the bleeding. "Now I need to clean these out and stitch you up." The whiskey made him hiss when she poured it over the wounds, his back arching off the rug. His eyes snapped open, more alert than they'd been since she'd found him. "Easy," Elena said softly. "I know it burns, but it'll keep infection away." Those steel-gray eyes fixed on her face, studying her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. She was alone in her cabin with a wounded stranger, a man whose scars suggested he was intimately familiar with violence. If he wanted to hurt her, there would be no one to hear her scream, no one to help. But something in his gaze wasn't threatening. Pain, yes, wariness, certainly, but also something that looked almost like gratitude. "Thank you," he managed to whisper, his voice rough as sandpaper. Elena's hands stilled for a moment. Such simple words, but the way he said them, with genuine emotion beneath the pain, made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Don't thank me yet," she replied, threading her needle. "I still have to sew you back together." The stitching was delicate work. Elena had to close both the entry and exit wounds, making sure the sutures would hold but wouldn't restrict his movement once he began to heal. Her patient remained remarkably still throughout the process, though she could see the muscles in his jaw working as he fought against the pain. By the time she finished, the sun was high overhead and Elena was exhausted. She'd used nearly all of her clean bandages to wrap his torso, and the stranger was finally sleeping deeply. Real sleep, not the unconsciousness of blood loss and shock. Elena sat back on her heels and really looked at him for the first time. Cleaned of blood and dirt, she could see that he was a handsome man, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His face was lean and angular, marked by the kind of deep lines that came from years of squinting into the sun and wind. Even unconscious, there was something dangerous about him, something that spoke of a life lived outside the boundaries of civilized society. But there was also something else, a quality she couldn't quite name that made her want to smooth the worry lines from his forehead, to chase away whatever demons haunted his dreams. Elena shook her head, trying to dispel such foolish thoughts. She was a healer, nothing more. She'd patched him up, and when he was strong enough to travel, he'd move on. That was how it worked with all her patients. She fixed what was broken, and they returned to their lives. She cleaned up the blood as best she could and put her medical supplies away, then settled into her rocking chair to keep watch. Someone who'd taken an Apache arrow was probably being hunted, and that meant danger might be coming to her doorstep. She kept her father's old shotgun across her lap and tried to convince herself that the fluttering in her chest was just worry about potential trouble, not anything to do with the mysterious stranger sleeping by her fireplace. As evening shadows began to creep across the cabin floor, Elena found herself studying his face again. He looked younger in sleep, less hard-edged and dangerous. She wondered what his story was. What had brought him to her door more dead than alive? She had no way of knowing that she was looking at the face of the most wanted man in 3 territories, or that before the week was out, that face would be permanently etched in her heart. Elena woke to the sound of her patient trying to sit up, his sharp intake of breath cutting through the pre-dawn quiet like a knife. She dozed fitfully in her chair throughout the night, the shotgun still across her lap, starting awake every time he shifted or groaned in his sleep. "Don't," she said quickly, setting the gun aside and moving to kneel beside him. "You'll tear your stitches." He'd managed to prop himself up on one elbow, his face pale with the effort and beaded with sweat. Those steel-gray eyes were fully alert now, scanning the cabin with the careful assessment of someone accustomed to waking up in unfamiliar places. "Where am I?" His voice was stronger than it had been yesterday, though still rough around the edges. "My cabin about 5 miles south of Deadwood Gulch," Elena replied, gently but firmly pushing him back down. "You collapsed at my door yesterday morning with an Apache arrow in your back. You've lost a lot of blood and you need to rest." He studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she was telling the truth. "You're a doctor?" "Close enough. My father was a physician back in San Antonio. He taught me everything he knew before the fever took him." Elena moved to the stove to prepare some broth. "What's your name?" The question hung in the air longer than it should have. Elena glanced back to see him staring at the ceiling, his jaw working as if he was chewing on his answer. "Cord," he said finally. "Cord Maverick." Elena nodded, ladling the warm broth into a cup. "Well, Mr. Maverick, you're lucky to be alive. That arrow missed your heart by about 2 inches and your lung by even less. How did you end up with Apache steel in your back?" "Wrong place, wrong time," he replied, accepting the cup with hands that shook slightly. "Seems to be a habit of mine." There was something in his tone that told Elena there was much more to the story, but she'd learned not to push her patients too hard for details. Men on the frontier often had complicated pasts, and sometimes it was better not to know the whole truth. "Can you tell me how long ago it happened? I need to know if infection might set in." Cord sipped the broth slowly, considering. "Day before yesterday, I think. Maybe longer. Time gets fuzzy when you're trying not to bleed to death." Elena frowned. If he'd been wounded 2 days ago and had made it this far, he was tougher than most men. But it also meant he'd been riding with an arrow in his back for nearly 48 hours, which should have been impossible. "Where's your horse?" she asked. "Dead. Ran her into the ground trying to get somewhere safe." He met her eyes, and she saw something that looked like regret there. She was a good horse, deserved better. The way he said it, with genuine grief for the animal he'd lost, made Elena's chest tighten unexpectedly. Whatever else this man might be, he wasn't entirely heartless. "You should eat something more substantial," she said, moving to prepare eggs and bacon. "Your body needs fuel to heal." As she cooked, Elena found herself stealing glances at her patient. In the morning light streaming through her windows, she could see details she'd missed the night before. His clothes, though torn and blood-stained, had been well made. His boots were expensive leather, and his gun belt, which she'd removed and set aside during his treatment, bore the kind of tool work that spoke of serious money. But it was his hands that really caught her attention. They were scarred and calloused from hard work, but the calluses weren't in the right places for a rancher or farmer. They were positioned exactly where years of drawing and firing a gun would leave their mark. Elena tried to push down the unease that was growing in her stomach. So what if he was a gunfighter? Plenty of men on the frontier made their living with iron on their hip. It didn't necessarily mean he was a criminal. She was setting a plate of food beside him when she heard the sound of horses approaching, multiple riders moving fast. Cord heard it too. She saw his whole body tense, his hand instinctively reaching for where his gun should be. "Expecting company?" he asked, his voice suddenly deadly quiet. Elena moved to the window and peered through the curtains. 3 men were riding hard toward her cabin, their horses lathered with sweat. She recognized the lead rider, Tom Bradley, a bounty hunter who occasionally passed through Deadwood Gulch. The other 2 were strangers, but they had the same hard look about them. "Bounty hunters," she said, her mouth going dry. She felt rather than saw Cord trying to sit up again. "Elena," he said, and the way he said her name made her turn to look at him. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Those men aren't here for a social visit. They're looking for someone, and if they find him, they'll kill him. Who are they looking for?" But even as she asked the question, Elena was beginning to understand. "Me?" The simple word hit her like a physical blow. Elena stared at him, her mind racing. Bounty hunters only pursued men with prices on their heads, men who'd committed serious crimes. "What did you do?" she whispered. "It's complicated." Cord was struggling to his feet now, ignoring her protests. "Right now, what matters is that you're in danger just by helping me. If they find me here," a sharp knock at the door cut him off. "Mrs. Rodriguez, it's Tom Bradley. Need to have a word with you." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Cord, who had gone completely still, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Despite his wounds, despite the fact that he could barely stand, he looked like the most dangerous man she'd ever seen. "The back room," she whispered. "There's a space behind the wardrobe where you can hide." Cord shook his head. "I won't put you in more danger than you're already in." "The back room," Elena repeated firmly. "Now." For a moment she thought he might argue, but then he nodded and moved as quietly as his injuries would allow toward the rear of the cabin. Elena waited until she heard the soft sound of the wardrobe being moved, then smoothed her skirt and opened the front door. Tom Bradley was exactly as she remembered him, a thin, wiry man with pale eyes and a scraggly beard that did nothing to hide the cruel twist of his mouth. The 2 men flanking him looked like they'd been carved from granite and left out in the weather too long. "Mr. Bradley," Elena said, keeping her voice steady, "what brings you out this way?" "Tracking a wounded man, ma'am. Dangerous outlaw name of Cord Maverick. Goes by Iron Wolf in some circles." Bradley's eyes were already scanning past her into the cabin. "Word is, he took an Apache arrow couple days back. Figure he might have come looking for medical attention." Elena's blood turned to ice water in her veins. Iron Wolf. She'd heard that name whispered in saloons and general stores from here to California. He was supposed to be one of the deadliest gunfighters alive, a man who'd killed more people than some small towns had residents. "I haven't seen anyone matching that description," she managed to say, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Bradley stepped closer, and Elena caught the stench of unwashed body and stale whiskey. "You sure about that, ma'am? Man's got a $5,000 bounty on his head. Dead or alive, makes a person mighty tempted to help him, thinking they might get a cut of that reward." "I said I haven't seen him." One of Bradley's companions, a barrel-chested man with dead black eyes, spoke up. "Mind if we take a look around?" Just to be sure. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it, but she kept her chin up. "Actually, I do mind. This is my home, and you have no right to search it without cause." Bradley's smile was like a razor blade. "Well now, ma'am, we got cause. See, we followed a blood trail that leads right to your door. Fresh blood, and plenty of it. Now either you treated someone recently, or you've got some explaining to do about whose blood that is." Elena felt the world tilt around her. She'd been so focused on getting Cord inside and tending his wounds that she'd forgotten about the trail he would have left. Of course they'd followed it here. I did treat someone, she admitted, seeing no way around it. A cowhand who'd been gored by a bull. But he left yesterday evening. Funny thing about that, the third bounty hunter said, pulling a piece of paper from his coat. This here is a wanted poster, fresh from the territorial marshal's office. Take a look at that face and tell me it don't look familiar. Elena's hands trembled as she took the poster. The face staring back at her was unmistakably Cord's, younger in the sketch, but definitely him. The text below the drawing made her knees go weak. Wanted dead or alive Cord. Iron Wolf Maverick. Murder, armed robbery, cattle rustling, $5,000 reward. So, Bradley said softly, want to try that story again, ma'am? Because lying to bounty hunters is a serious offense. Could make you an accessory after the fact. Elena stared at the poster, her mind reeling. The man she'd saved, the man whose pain had touched her heart, was apparently one of the most wanted criminals in the territory. Everything she thought she knew about him had been a lie. But even as that realization hit her like a slap to the face, another thought surfaced. If these men found him, they would kill him. And despite everything, despite the lies and the wanted poster and the bounty on his head, Elena discovered that she wasn't ready to let that happen. Not yet. Not until she knew the whole truth. Elena stared at the wanted poster in her trembling hands, her mind racing through a dozen different scenarios. She could feel the three bounty hunters watching her every expression, waiting for some sign that would confirm their suspicions. Behind her, somewhere in the back room, the most wanted man in 3 territories was hidden behind her wardrobe, probably listening to every word. "Ma'am?" Tom Bradley prompted, his pale eyes glittering with predatory patience. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Elena forced herself to meet his gaze. "I've seen this poster before," she said carefully. "Every law-abiding citizen has. But like I told you, the man I treated was a cowhand with a bull goring. Nothing like this iron wolf character." Bradley stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Funny thing is, ma'am, bull gorings don't usually leave arrow wounds, and we found Apache fletching about a quarter-mile back, along with enough blood to paint a barn." Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was amazed it didn't show through her dress, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't know anything about arrows, Mr. Bradley. I treated a man with puncture wounds from a bull's horn, gave him some supplies, and sent him on his way. Now, unless you have a warrant from the territorial marshal, I'd appreciate it if you'd get off my property." The barrel-chested bounty hunter with the dead eyes spoke up. "Mighty brave talk for a woman alone out here, ma'am." Might not be safe, taking that tone with armed men. "Is that a threat?" Elena asked, her voice like ice. "Just an observation," the man replied with a cold smile. Bradley held up a hand to quiet his companion. Now, no need for harsh words. We're all reasonable people here." He glanced around the cabin's interior again, his gaze lingering on the bloodstains Elena hadn't quite managed to clean from the wooden floor. "Tell you what, ma'am. How about we take a quick look around, just to satisfy ourselves that this Iron Wolf fella isn't hiding somewhere? Then we'll be on our way and you can go back to your doctoring." Elena felt trapped. If she refused, they'd know she was hiding something. If she agreed, they'd find Cord and kill him on the spot. The wanted poster clearly said dead or alive, and men like these always found dead easier to manage than alive. "I'm afraid that's not possible," she said. "I have medical supplies and patient records that are confidential. I can't have strangers rummaging through my home." "Medical records?" The third bounty hunter laughed harshly. "Lady, this ain't some fancy hospital back east. This is the frontier. Ain't no such thing as confidential out here." Elena was about to respond when she heard something that made her blood freeze. A soft thud from the back room, like someone trying to move while injured and not quite managing to stay quiet. All 3 bounty hunters heard it too. Bradley's hand dropped to his gun. "What was that?" he asked softly. Elena's mind went blank for a terrifying moment. Then, desperate inspiration struck. "My cat," she said quickly. "He's probably knocked something over. That animal is always getting into mischief." "Sounded pretty big for a cat," the barrel-chested man said suspiciously. "He's a very large cat," Elena replied, hoping her voice didn't sound as strained to them as it did to her. Part wildcat, actually. I found him as a kitten and nursed him back to health. He's protective. As if summoned by her words, a genuine cat, a small tabby that sometimes visited her cabin looking for scraps, chose that moment to wander around the corner of the building. Elena had never been so grateful to see an animal in her life. There he is now, she said, relief flooding her voice. See? Just a cat. Bradley looked from the small tabby to Elena, clearly not entirely convinced, but unable to prove otherwise. Mighty small for all that noise, he muttered. Sound carries strangely in these old cabins, Elena said. The wood settles, creates echoes. The tension stretched like a bowstring for several long seconds. Then Bradley stepped back, though his hand remained near his weapon. All right, ma'am. We'll take your word for it, for now. But if you do happen to see this Iron Wolf character, you remember that reward money. $5,000 is more than most folks see in 5 years out here. I'll keep that in mind, Elena said. Bradley touched the brim of his hat. You have yourself a good day, ma'am. And remember, a woman alone out here needs to be careful who she trusts. Some men ain't what they seem. The 3 bounty hunters mounted their horses and rode away, but Elena noticed they didn't go far. She could see them through her window, setting up what looked like a surveillance camp about half a mile away, just within sight of her cabin. Elena waited until she was sure they were settled, then hurried to the back room. She found Cord sitting on the floor behind the wardrobe, his face gray with pain and his shirt soaked with fresh blood. You tore your stitches, she said, immediately dropping to her knees beside him. Heard voices, he replied through gritted teeth. Tried to get to where I could see what was happening. In case you needed help. Elena felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. Even wounded and barely able to stand, his first instinct had been to protect her. Well, they're gone for now, but they're watching the cabin. They know you're here, or at least they suspect it. Cord nodded grimly. Tom Bradley's good at what he does. He won't give up easy. So it's true, Elena said quietly, helping him struggle to his feet. You really are Iron Wolf Maverick. Cord met her eyes and she saw something she hadn't expected there. Shame. Yes, he said simply. The poster said murder, armed robbery, cattle rustling. Elena's voice was carefully neutral as she guided him back toward the main room. $5,000 is a lot of money for one man. It is. Cord settled heavily into the chair she'd been sleeping in, his breathing labored. Elena, I need you to understand something. Those men will kill you if they think you're helping me. You should turn me in. Elena began cleaning his reopened wounds, her hands steady despite the chaos in her mind. Is it true? Did you do those things? Cord was quiet for so long that Elena thought he might not answer. Then slowly he began to speak. 3 years ago, I was a deputy marshal in Tucson. Had a badge, a steady job, even a girl I was thinking about marrying. I believed in the law, believed justice mattered. His voice grew bitter. Turns out the law's only as good as the men enforcing it. Elena continued working on his stitches, but she was listening to every word. There was a cattle baron named Vincent Hardwick, Cord continued. Rich, powerful, connected to politicians all the way to Washington. He'd been systematically driving small ranchers off their land, burning them out, killing their cattle, sometimes killing the ranchers themselves. The local sheriff was in his pocket, but I had evidence. Real evidence. What happened? I arrested him, followed proper procedure, built a solid case. But the night before the trial, someone broke into the jail and shot Hardwick dead. When the sheriff arrived, he found me standing over the body with a smoking gun. Elena's hands stilled. But you didn't do it. No, but someone wanted it to look like I did. Someone who knew I'd been investigating Hardwick. Someone who could get into the jail without raising suspicion? Cord's laugh was harsh. The sheriff claimed I'd been paid by Hardwick's competitors to eliminate him. Said I'd gone rogue, that I couldn't be trusted. Before I knew it, I was the one in a cell, charged with murder. How did you escape? I didn't at first. Sat in that jail for 2 weeks, believing the system would work, that the truth would come out. Then I overheard the sheriff talking to some of Hardwick's men about how I was going to have an accident while trying to escape. Cord touched the wolf tattoo on his shoulder. That night, I really did escape. Had help from someone who knew the truth but couldn't speak up publicly. Elena resumed her stitching, her mind processing his story. And the other charges? The robbery, the cattle rustling? When you're already wanted for murder, it's easy to blame every unsolved crime on you. Especially when you're living rough, taking what you need to survive. Cord met her eyes. I won't lie to you, Elena. I've stolen food when I was starving. I've taken horses when I needed to get away from posses. And I've killed men, but only when they were trying to kill me first. Why Iron Wolf? Cord's expression softened slightly. The Apache who shot me with that arrow? He wasn't trying to kill me. He was warning me. There's a war party moving through this area, and they consider me a friend, I suppose. They call me Iron Wolf because of this. He touched his tattoo again. It was my mother's tribal name. She was half Apache, though I didn't learn that until after she died. Elena tied off the last stitch and sat back on her heels. The story explained so much. His comfort with pain, his instinctive wariness, the way he moved like someone accustomed to being hunted. But it also raised new questions. If you're innocent, why don't you go to the territorial marshal? Clear your name? With what proof? The man who helped me escape died 6 months later, shot in the back by persons unknown. The evidence I'd gathered against Hardwick disappeared from the sheriff's office, and I'm worth $5,000 to anyone who brings me in dead. Cord shook his head. Even if I could prove my innocence, there are too many people who profit from keeping me wanted. Elena stood and began putting away her medical supplies, her mind churning. The logical thing to do would be to wait until dark, then somehow signal the bounty hunters. Turn him in, collect the reward, get on with her life. It was the safe choice, the sensible choice. But as she looked at Cord, really looked at him, she saw not the dangerous outlaw from the wanted poster, but a man who'd been betrayed by the very system he'd tried to serve. A man who'd spent 3 years running, not because he was guilty, but because he'd been framed. Those bounty hunters aren't going anywhere, she said finally. They're camped out there, watching. They'll wait as long as it takes. Cord nodded grimly. I know, which is why I need to leave tonight. I can't stay here and put you in more danger. You can barely stand, let alone ride. And you don't have a horse. I'll manage. I always do. Elena turned to face him, her decision crystallizing in her mind like water turning to ice. No, she said firmly. You're not going anywhere until you're healed. And when you do go, it won't be alone. Cord stared at her. Elena, you don't know what you're saying. If you help me, you become an outlaw too. They'll hunt you just like they hunt me. Elena thought about her quiet life in Deadwood Gulch, her reputation as a healer, the safety and stability she'd built for herself. Then she thought about the man sitting before her, wounded, haunted, but still trying to protect her even when it would cost him everything. Then I guess, she said quietly, you'd better teach me how to run. Elena had never planned to become an outlaw, but as she watched the sun set over the Arizona territory, while 3 bounty hunters maintained their vigil half a mile away, she found herself surprisingly calm about the decision. Maybe it was the way Cord had looked at her when she'd offered to help, as if she'd just performed a miracle instead of simply choosing to do what felt right. Or maybe it was the growing certainty that running with him would be more living than she'd done in years of safe, predictable healing. You're sure about this? Cord asked for the 3rd time in an hour. He was sitting up now, moving more easily, though she could see the effort it cost him. Once we leave here together, there's no going back. You'll be wanted too. Elena finished packing her medical supplies into saddlebags she'd retrieved from her small barn. I'm sure, she said, but if we're going to do this, we need a plan better than just running blind into the desert. I know a place, Cord said. Apache safe ground, about 2 days' ride north. My mother's people will shelter us while I heal properly, and we figure out our next move. Your mother's people? Elena paused in her packing. You said she was half Apache. Are you certain they'll welcome a white woman? Cord's expression grew thoughtful. My mother's brother is still alive. He's a war chief named Running Bear. He knew about me long before I knew about him. When I first went on the run, I was half dead from thirst in the desert when his warriors found me. He took one look at my face and said I had my mother's eyes. Cord touched his wolf tattoo again. This marking isn't just decoration. It's a family symbol. It marks me as one of them, despite my white father. Elena nodded, filing away this information. She was beginning to understand that Cord Maverick was a far more complicated man than his wanted poster suggested. What about horses? I have one, but she's not built for hard riding with two people. There's a horse trader named Miguel Santos about 10 miles west. He owes me a favor, and more importantly, he doesn't ask questions. Cord struggled to his feet, testing his strength. But getting there means slipping past our watchers, and I'm not sure I'm up for that kind of ride yet. Elena had been thinking about this problem all afternoon. What if they thought you were dead? Cord raised an eyebrow. Come again? Those bounty hunters want proof they've earned their reward. If they think you're dead, they'll move on to look for your body, or they'll head back to collect their money. Elena's mind was working through the possibilities. What if we gave them that proof? Elena, I'm not actually planning to die to avoid capture. She laughed despite the tension. Not really die. But what if they thought you had? What if they found evidence that Iron Wolf Maverick had succumbed to his wounds? Cord stared at her, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. You're thinking like an outlaw already. What kind of evidence? Elena moved to her medical cabinet and pulled out a bottle of sheep's blood she kept for certain procedures. This, some torn clothes, maybe your wolf tattoo cut from a piece of leather. Arrange it right, and it could look like you bled out and wild animals got to the body. Leaving only pieces behind, Cord finished, admiration clear in his voice. That's actually brilliant, but it would mean leaving everything behind. Your home, your practice, your life. Elena looked around the cabin that had been her sanctuary for 3 years. She'd built a good life here, a respectable life. She had patients who depended on her, a reputation that had taken years to establish. Leaving would mean abandoning all of that to run with a wanted man into an uncertain future. But when she looked at Cord, she realized that uncertain future felt more alive with possibility than all the security she was leaving behind. My life, she said quietly, has been about healing people and then watching them leave. Maybe it's time I went somewhere instead of always being the one left behind. Something shifted in Cord's expression. Surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that made Elena's breath catch. He moved toward her, slowly, giving her time to step away if she wanted. When she didn't, he reached up and touched her cheek with fingers that were surprisingly gentle for a man with such a violent reputation. Elena, he said softly, I need you to understand what you're giving up for a man you barely know. I know enough, she replied, leaning into his touch. I know you tried to protect me even when you were wounded. I know you cared more about my safety than your own escape. I know you've been running for 3 years from a crime you didn't commit. She covered his hand with hers. And I know that for the first time in my life, I'm choosing adventure over safety. Cord's other arm came up to circle her waist, pulling her closer. And I know, he said, his voice rough with emotion, that you're the first person in 3 years to look at me and see something other than a wanted poster. The kiss, when it came, was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid this moment might shatter if handled too roughly. But when Elena's arms came up around his neck, when she pressed closer, despite his injuries, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of desperate loneliness, finally finding solace. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena rested her forehead against his. We should probably work on not getting killed before we explore this further, she said, trying to lighten the suddenly intense atmosphere. Cord's laugh was warm against her ear. Practical and romantic. I'm definitely keeping you. They spent the next hour preparing their deception. Elena cut a piece of leather into the rough shape of Cord's wolf tattoo, then soaked it in sheep's blood, along with strips of his torn shirt. They scattered the evidence near the creek behind her cabin, along with enough blood to suggest a mortal wound and drag marks that could have been made by scavengers. Think it'll work? Elena asked, surveying their handiwork. Tom Bradley's good, but he's also greedy, Cord replied. If he thinks I'm dead, he'll want to find my body to prove it and collect his reward. When he can't find enough pieces to be sure, He'll probably decide I was dragged off by animals and settle for the evidence we've left. Elena nodded, then took one last look at her cabin. She loaded everything essential onto her horse: medical supplies, food, water, and the small amount of money she'd saved over the years. Everything else would have to stay behind. Regrets? Cord asked, watching her face. Ask me in a week, Elena replied. Right now, I'm too scared and excited to think straight. They waited until well after midnight to make their move. Elena's mare, Estrella, was a sturdy quarter horse with enough stamina for long-distance travel, though carrying two riders would slow them down considerably. Cord insisted on walking for the first mile, both to spare the horse and to avoid putting weight on his healing wounds. The night was clear and cold, with enough moonlight to navigate by, but not so much that they'd be easily spotted. They moved carefully, taking advantage of every bit of cover the landscape offered: rocks, gullies, sparse vegetation. Elena found herself impressed by how quietly Cord could move despite his injuries. This was clearly a man who'd had plenty of practice avoiding detection. They were about 3 miles from the cabin when they heard the sound that made Elena's blood run cold: the distinctive war cry of Apache warriors, echoing across the desert from the direction they'd just come. "What's happening?" Elena whispered, her hand instinctively going to the rifle she'd strapped to her saddle. Cord held up a hand for silence, listening intently. The war cries came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of gunfire and shouting voices. "The bounty hunters' camp," Cord said grimly. "Sounds like my Apache friends just found some uninvited guests in their territory." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. Will they be killed? Depends on how smart they are and how quickly they can get out of Apache land. Cord's expression was hard to read in the moonlight. The Apache don't take kindly to armed men camping without permission, especially this close to their sacred places. They listened to the distant sounds of conflict: more gunshots, the thunder of galloping horses, gradually fading as the disturbance moved away from them. Elena found herself hoping the bounty hunters would escape alive, despite everything they represented. "Does this complicate our plan?" she asked. "Actually, it might help," Cord replied. "If Bradley and his men are busy dealing with Apache warriors, they won't have time to investigate our little deception until tomorrow at the earliest. Gives us more of a head start." They continued their careful progress through the night, covering ground steadily, if not quickly. Elena found herself studying Cord's profile in the moonlight, marveling at how completely her life had changed in just 2 days. 48 hours ago, she'd been a respectable frontier healer with a quiet, predictable life. Now she was fleeing through the desert with the most wanted man in 3 territories, her heart racing with equal parts fear and exhilaration. "Elena," Cord said softly, breaking into her thoughts. "Yes? Thank you. For everything. For saving my life. For believing my story. For—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "For seeing something in me worth saving." Elena's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you for giving me a reason to finally live, instead of just existing." As dawn began to paint the eastern sky with pale gold, they reached Miguel Santos's horse trading post, a ramshackle collection of corrals and buildings tucked into a canyon that provided natural shelter from the wind. Santos himself was an elderly Mexican man with knowing eyes and the kind of discretion that came from years of dealing with people who valued privacy above all else. "Cord Maverick," Santos said without surprise when they approached his main corral. "I heard you were dead." "Working on it," Cord replied dryly. "Miguel, I need horses. 2 good ones, built for distance." Santos's gaze moved to Elena, assessing but not judgmental. "The senora comes with you?" "She does." "Ah." Santos nodded as if this explained everything. "Then you will need my best. Love makes fools of us all, but at least you should be well-mounted fools." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't deny Santos's assumption. The truth was more complicated than that, wasn't it? But there was something between her and Cord, something that had grown from gratitude and shared danger into something deeper. An hour later, they were mounted on 2 of Santos's finest horses, a black gelding for Cord and a bay mare for Elena. They had fresh supplies, directions to the Apache safe ground, and Santos's promise that he'd never seen them. As they rode away from the trading post toward whatever uncertain future awaited them, Elena realized that she'd never felt more alive or more terrified in her entire life, and she was looking forward to every minute of it. 2 days of hard riding through unforgiving desert terrain had pushed both Elena and Cord to their limits. Despite Miguel Santos's excellent horses, Cord's wounds were taking their toll, and Elena could see the gray pallor of exhaustion and pain creeping back into his face. They'd been living on jerky and water, sleeping in whatever shelter they could find, always listening for the sound of pursuing hoofbeats that never came. The Apache safe ground revealed itself gradually, like a mirage becoming real. What had seemed like empty desert slowly resolved into a hidden canyon protected by towering red rock walls and fed by a natural spring. Ancient petroglyphs covered the canyon walls, and Elena could feel the weight of centuries in this place. Generations of people who had found sanctuary here. "We're being watched," Cord said quietly as they guided their horses down the narrow trail into the canyon. Elena's hand moved instinctively toward her rifle, but Cord shook his head. "If they meant us harm, we'd already be dead. They're deciding whether to welcome us or challenge us." As if summoned by his words, 3 Apache warriors emerged from concealment among the rocks. They moved with fluid grace, rifles held ready, but not aimed directly at the newcomers. The leader was a man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and intelligent dark eyes that reminded Elena powerfully of Cord's own gaze. The Apache leader studied them for a long moment, then spoke in his native tongue. Cord responded haltingly in the same language, his pronunciation careful but clearly unpracticed. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Elena understanding none of it but sensing the tension gradually ease. Finally, the leader switched to accented but fluent English. "My sister's son," he said, addressing Cord directly. "You returned to us wounded and with a white woman. This requires explanation." "Uncle," Cord replied, using the English word with obvious respect. "This is Elena Rodriguez. She saved my life, and in doing so, became hunted herself. I asked sanctuary for us both." Running Bear, for Elena was certain this was Cord's uncle, shifted his attention to her. His gaze was penetrating, but not unfriendly. "You are a healer," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Elena replied, meeting his eyes steadily. "Your nephew came to me with an arrow wound. I couldn't turn him away. And now you run with him. Why?" Elena considered the question carefully. The wrong answer could mean rejection, possibly death, but she sensed that anything less than complete honesty would be detected and dismissed. "Because he's a good man who's been wrongly accused," she said simply. "Because helping him was the right thing to do. And because," she glanced at Cord, then back to Running Bear. "Because I love him." Running Bear's eyebrows rose slightly at her directness. Behind him, the other 2 warriors exchanged glances. Cord's sharp intake of breath told Elena he hadn't expected such a blunt declaration, but she had no intention of backing down from the truth. "Love," Running Bear repeated thoughtfully, "a powerful medicine, but also a dangerous one. It makes warriors of women and fools of men." His stern expression softened slightly. "But it is also sacred. You are welcome in this place, Elena Rodriguez, as is my nephew, who has finally learned to claim his heritage." The relief that flooded through Elena nearly buckled her knees. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been until the tension left her. Running Bear gestured toward the deeper part of the canyon. "Come, you both need food and rest, and the healer needs to tend properly to wounds that have reopened during your journey." Elena glanced at Cord in surprise. She'd been so focused on watching for pursuit and navigating the difficult terrain that she hadn't noticed his condition deteriorating. Now that Running Bear mentioned it, she could see fresh blood seeping through his shirt. They were led to a sheltered area where several traditional Apache shelters had been erected around the natural spring. It was clearly a place that had been used for generations, a refuge for those who needed healing, both physical and spiritual. "You will rest here," Running Bear said, indicating a shelter slightly apart from the others. "Food will be brought, and the healer women will assist with medicines if needed." He paused, looking directly at Cord. "Tonight, you will tell me the full story of how my sister's son became Iron Wolf Maverick, Tomorrow we will decide what comes next. As Running Bear withdrew, Elena immediately set about examining Cord's wounds. The hard riding had indeed reopened some of his stitches, and infection was beginning to set in around the edges. "You should have told me," she said, trying to keep the worry out of her voice as she cleaned the wounds with water from the spring. "Couldn't afford to stop," Cord replied, though his voice was tight with pain. "We needed to reach safety. A lot of good safety will do if you die from infection." Elena's hands were gentle despite her sharp words. "You're burning with fever, Cord. This could have killed you. But it didn't," he said softly, catching her hand, "because I had you taking care of me." Elena felt her heart do that complicated flutter again. "About what I said to your uncle. Did you mean it?" Elena met his eyes. "Yes, I know it's crazy. I've known you for less than a week, most of which you've spent either unconscious or running for your life. But yes, I meant it." Cord's other hand came up to cup her cheek. "I've been alone for 3 years, Elena. 3 years of trusting no one, caring about nothing except survival. Then you opened your door and everything changed." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I love you too. I probably loved you from the moment you chose to save my life instead of claiming that bounty." This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. This was a kiss between two people who had chosen each other despite impossible circumstances, who had found something precious in the midst of chaos and danger. They were interrupted by the arrival of food, an elderly Apache woman who smiled at them knowingly and set down bowls of fragrant stew and flatbread. She said something to Cord in Apache that made him laugh, the first genuinely relaxed sound Elena had heard from him. "What did she say?" Elena asked. "She said you kiss like a woman in love, but tend wounds like a warrior. She approves." Elena felt her cheeks warm, but she was pleased by the assessment. Over the next several hours, as Cord slept off his fever and Elena worked to fight the infection in his wounds, several Apache women came to observe her techniques. They shared their own healing knowledge freely, showing her plants and methods she'd never encountered. It was the first time in years that Elena had felt part of a community of healers, rather than working in isolation. These women understood the weight of holding life and death in your hands, the satisfaction of successful healing, and the grief of inevitable losses. That evening, when Cord's fever had broken and he was able to sit up without assistance, Running Bear returned for the promised explanation. They sat around a small fire as Cord told his story, the frame-up, the corruption, the years of running. Running Bear listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "You have carried this burden alone for too long," Running Bear said when Cord finished, "but the spirits have brought you here, to this sacred place, with a woman strong enough to stand beside you. Perhaps it is time to stop running and start fighting back." "Fighting back how?" Cord asked. "I have no proof, no allies, no resources except what I can carry." "You have family," Running Bear corrected. "You have a woman who loves you enough to become outlaw for you. And you have something else. You have finally learned who you truly are." Elena watched as something shifted in Cord's posture, in his expression. For 3 years he'd been running from his identity, hiding from his name, trying to disappear. But here, in this sacred place, surrounded by his mother's people and holding the hand of a woman who loved him, he was beginning to remember who he'd been before the world tried to destroy him. "What are you suggesting?" Elena asked. Running Bear smiled, and there was something dangerous in that expression. "I am suggesting that it is time for Iron Wolf Maverick to disappear forever. But Cord Maverick, son of my sister, nephew of a war chief, beloved of a brave woman, he might have a different future entirely." "The bounty hunters won't just give up," Elena pointed out. "No," Running Bear agreed, "but bounty hunters hunt wanted men. They do not hunt dead men." He looked at Cord meaningfully. "Your deception with the blood was clever, but it will not fool them for long. However, if Iron Wolf Maverick were to die in a way that could be verified." "You're talking about faking my death more convincingly," Cord said slowly. "I am talking about giving you a chance to reclaim your life. But it will require courage from both of you, and trust in people you barely know." Running Bear stood. "Think on it tonight. Tomorrow I will show you something that may change how you see your options." After he left, Elena and Cord sat in comfortable silence. watching the fire burn down to embers. Around them, the canyon was peaceful, protected, timeless. For the first time in days, Elena felt truly safe. "What do you think he meant?" she asked eventually. "I don't know," Cord replied, pulling her closer against his side. "But I know one thing. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Elena nestled against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "Together," she agreed. Above them, the desert stars burned with ancient light, bearing witness to a love that had been forged in danger and tempered by trust. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would meet it as partners, as lovers, as two people who had found in each other something worth fighting for. But first, they would heal. Both of them had wounds that needed tending. His physical, hers emotional, and both of them scarred by lives that had demanded too much strength for too long. Here, in this sacred place, they could finally rest and plan not just for escape, but for a future that might actually be worth living. The revelation came at dawn, when Running Bear led Elena and Cord to a hidden cave deep in the canyon walls. Inside, illuminated by the flickering light of oil lamps, were things that made Elena's breath catch. Official documents, telegraph equipment, and most shocking of all, a man in a deputy marshal's uniform sitting calmly at a makeshift desk. "Elena Rodriguez, Cord Maverick," Running Bear said formally. "Meet Deputy Marshal James Wheeler." "Jim, these are the people I told you about." Elena instinctively stepped closer to Cord, her hand moving toward her weapon, but the deputy raised both hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy, folks," Wheeler said with a slight smile. "I'm one of the good guys, believe it or not. Have been for about 2 years now, ever since I started investigating the Hardwick case." "Investigating what case?" Cord demanded. "Vincent Hardwick is dead. Case closed." "The murder case, yes, but not the corruption case, not the frame-up case, and definitely not the Vincent Hardwick Jr. case." Wheeler stood, revealing himself to be a tall, lean man with prematurely gray hair and intelligent eyes. "See, when a deputy marshal gets framed for murder and goes on the run, some of us who still believe in justice start asking uncomfortable questions." Elena felt Cord's tension like a coiled spring beside her. "What kind of questions?" "Like why a deputy with a spotless record would suddenly turn killer. Like why all the evidence against Hardwick Sr. disappeared so conveniently. Like why Sheriff Morrison suddenly had enough money to buy a fancy new house right after the trial." Wheeler pulled out a thick folder. "But mostly like why Vincent Hardwick Jr. was so eager to see you blamed for his father's death." The words hit Cord like a physical blow. Elena could see the pieces clicking together in his mind, the terrible understanding dawning. "Junior killed his own father," Cord said slowly. "Bingo. Had his old man murdered to inherit the ranch and the money, then set you up to take the blame. Figured killing 2 birds with 1 stone, get rid of Daddy and the lawman who was getting too close to the truth?" Wheeler's expression hardened. "Problem is, proving it, Junior's got money, connections, and a talent for making inconvenient people disappear." "How long have you known?" Elena asked. "Suspected for months. Knew for sure about 6 weeks ago when I finally tracked down the real killer. A gunslinger named Pete Cassidy who got drunk in a Tombstone saloon and bragged about the job to the wrong person." Wheeler's smile was grim. "Cassidy had a sudden attack of conscience when I explained that he could either testify against Junior or hang for murder." Elena felt hope and fear warring in her chest. "So you can clear Cord's name?" "I can. But there's a problem." Wheeler looked directly at Cord. "Junior knows I'm close. He's put out word that there's an extra $5,000 for anyone who brings him Iron Wolf Maverick's head. Literally. Not alive anymore. Just dead. He wants you buried before you can testify to what you know." "So we're still trapped," Elena said, her heart sinking. "Not necessarily," Running Bear interjected. "There is another way, but it requires great courage and great trust." Wheeler nodded. "Here's what we're proposing. Tomorrow I'm going to arrest Iron Wolf Maverick in a very public way. There's going to be a gunfight. Iron Wolf is going to die, witnessed by multiple people, including those bounty hunters who've been tracking you." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "You want him to die?" "I want Iron Wolf to die," Wheeler corrected. "But Cord Maverick, the real Cord Maverick, Cleared of all charges and free to live his life. He gets to live. A fake death, Cord said slowly, but convincing enough that even Junior believes it. Exactly. We've got Apache warriors willing to play the part of my deputies. We've got a location picked out that'll give us maximum visibility, but also maximum control over who sees what. And we've got Cassidy ready to testify the moment Junior thinks he's safe. Elena's mind was racing. What about me? If Cord dies, what happens to the woman who was helping him? Wheeler's expression gentled. Elena Rodriguez dies too, I'm afraid. But Maria Santos, Miguel's niece, who's been living in California for the past few years, she might be able to start a new life somewhere with her husband. Miguel's already agreed to the deception, Running Bear added. He has family in California who will vouch for your identity. Papers, history, everything you need. Elena looked at Cord, seeing her own mixture of hope and terror reflected in his eyes. It could work, she said slowly. But if something goes wrong, we're both dead for real, Cord finished. Elena, you don't have to do this. Wheeler can get you clear without the fake death. You could go back to your old life. Elena thought about her old life. Safe, predictable, lonely. Then she thought about the past week, the danger and fear and exhilaration of being truly alive for the first time in years. Most of all, she thought about the man standing beside her, the love they'd found in the midst of chaos. My old life, she said firmly, didn't have you in it. The plan was set for the following afternoon at Devil's Canyon, a natural amphitheater of red rock about 10 miles from the Apache safe ground. Wheeler would bring his deputies and stage the arrest. The bounty hunters, who had been tracking rumors and false trails for days, would be anonymously tipped to the location. In the ensuing gunfight, both Iron Wolf and his woman would fall, their bodies swept away by the flash flood that Running Bear's weather-wise warriors assured them would come with the afternoon thunderstorm. Elena spent the morning in a strange state of calm, helping prepare the various deceptions they would need. Apache women painted realistic-looking wounds with berry juice and clay. Warriors practiced their roles as federal deputies. Wheeler went over the script again and again until everyone knew their parts. You realize, Cord said as they prepared to ride out, that after today, we can never go back. Elena Rodriguez and Iron Wolf Maverick will be dead. We'll be different people. Good, Elena replied, checking the fake blood packets hidden in her clothing. I was getting tired of being respectable. The amphitheater at Devil's Canyon was perfect for their purposes, a natural stage surrounded by rocky walls that would hide Apache warriors while providing excellent sightlines for the bounty hunters they expected to arrive. Wheeler and his deputies were already in position when Elena and Cord rode in, playing their parts as a desperate outlaw and his woman making a last stand. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure the entire canyon could hear it, but her hands were steady as she dismounted and took her position behind the rocks they'd selected for cover. Iron Wolf Maverick, Wheeler's voice boomed across the canyon. You're surrounded. Give yourself up. Go to hell, Marshal, Cord shouted back, and Elena was amazed at how easily he slipped into the role of defiant outlaw. The gunfight, when it began, was carefully choreographed but terrifyingly realistic. Apache warriors fired blank rounds while Elena and Cord used the fake blood packets to simulate wounds. Elena had practiced her death scene a dozen times, but when the moment came to fall and lie perfectly still while blood pooled around her, the performance felt disturbingly real. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Cord's own death, a dramatic fall from behind their rock shelter, complete with final words about never surrendering. He was, she realized, quite a good actor. Above them, storm clouds that had been gathering all day finally opened. The rain came down in torrents, just as Running Bear had predicted. In the chaos of the sudden downpour, Elena heard Wheeler shout orders to search for the bodies while the flash floodwaters began rising in the canyon floor. The next few minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. Under cover of the rain and rising water, Apache warriors swept the canyon for bodies, while actually helping Elena and Cord slip away through hidden passages in the rock walls. By the time the bounty hunters arrived, there was nothing to see but a flooded canyon and a marshal's report of 2 outlaws killed while resisting arrest. Hours later, Elena sat beside a small fire in a new hideout, watching Cord carefully wash the fake blood from his face. They were alive. They were free. and they were about to become completely different people. Any regrets? Cord asked, echoing her own words from what felt like a lifetime ago. Elna thought about it seriously. They would have to leave Arizona territory, start over somewhere new with new names and new histories. She would never again be Dr. Rodriguez's daughter, the respected healer of Deadwood Gulch. He would never again be the deputy marshal who'd tried to serve justice and been betrayed for it. But they would be together, they would be free, and they would be alive in a way that neither of them had been before they found each other. Ask me in 50 years, Elena said, taking his hand, when we're old and gray and telling our grandchildren about the time we died and came back to life for love. Cord's smile was like sunrise after the darkest night. I love you, Maria Santos, he said, trying out her new name. I love you too, Thomas Santos, she replied, and kissed the man who had once been Iron Wolf Maverick, but was now simply the person she would spend the rest of her life loving. Outside their shelter, the storm was passing, leaving the desert washed clean and ready for new growth. Just like them. 6 months later, in a small town called Esperanza in Northern California, a woman named Maria Santos stood in her new medical clinic, carefully stitching up the hand of a young rancher who'd had an unfortunate encounter with a piece of barbed wire. Beside her, organizing supplies with the quiet efficiency she'd come to love, her husband Thomas helped prepare the next patient's treatment. To the people of Esperanza, they were simply the Santos couple, a skilled healer and her devoted husband who'd come west from Texas to start a new life together. Maria was known for her gentle bedside manner and miraculous healing abilities, while Thomas had quickly established himself as an honest horse trader and occasional deputy when the town needed extra law enforcement. What the townspeople didn't know was that they were witnessing one of the greatest love stories ever lived on the American frontier. The transformation from Elena Rodriguez and Cord Iron Wolf Maverick to Maria and Thomas Santos had been more complete than either had dared to hope. Deputy Marshal Wheeler had been true to his word. Pete Cassidy's testimony had not only cleared Cord's name posthumously, but had also brought down the entire corruption network that had framed him. Vincent Hardwick Jr. was now serving life in territorial prison. Sheriff Morrison had been stripped of his badge and was awaiting his own trial, and the real story of Iron Wolf Maverick had become frontier legend. According to the official record, Cord Maverick had been a heroic deputy marshal who died in the line of duty, betrayed by corrupt officials, but ultimately vindicated. The outlaw known as Iron Wolf was revealed to have been an innocent man driven to desperate measures by a justice system that had failed him. Songs were being written about him in saloons from Arizona to California, and his story had become a cautionary tale about the importance of true justice. But the man himself was very much alive, standing in a sunny clinic in California, handing his wife clean bandages and stealing kisses when their patients weren't looking. Mrs. Santos, the young rancher said, as Maria finished his stitches, you've got the gentlest hands in 3 counties. My pa always said you could tell a lot about a person by how they handle someone else's pain, and you handle it like you've known plenty of your own. Maria smiled, thinking about arrow extractions and fake blood, and the night she'd chosen adventure over safety. We've all known pain, Mr. Harrison. The trick is learning how to heal from it. Yes, ma'am. And speaking of healing, the rancher glanced at Thomas with a grin. Word is you two are expecting a little addition to the Santos family come spring. Maria's hand moved instinctively to the slight swell of her belly, still barely visible but definitely there. She and Thomas had discovered the pregnancy just 2 weeks ago, and the joy of it still felt too precious and fragile to believe fully. Word travels fast in small towns, Thomas said with a smile that made Maria's heart flutter just as much as it had that first day in her old cabin. Good news should travel fast, the rancher replied, standing and testing his bandaged hand. This town needs more good people, and I reckon any child of yours will be lucky to have parents who understand about second chances. After he left, Maria found herself alone with Thomas for the first time all day. The clinic was quiet, the afternoon light streaming through clean windows, and she felt that same sense of peace and completeness that had surprised her 6 months ago when she'd first realized she was truly happy. Any regrets yet? Thomas asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his hands over their unborn child. Maria leaned back against his chest. marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "Well," she said thoughtfully, "I do miss the excitement of running from bounty hunters and staging fake deaths." Thomas laughed, the sound rich and warm in her ear. "We could always rob a bank if you're getting bored." "Maybe after the baby's born," Maria replied seriously, then smiled at his surprised chuckle. "I'm joking, Thomas Santos. I think I've had enough adventure for one lifetime. Even if it brought us together?" Maria turned in his arms, looking up into the steel-gray eyes that had captivated her from the moment she'd first seen them. "Especially because it brought us together. Sometimes the most dangerous adventures lead to the safest harbors." "And sometimes," Thomas said, lowering his head to kiss her, "the most wanted men are the ones most worth loving." Outside their clinic, the town of Esperanza went about its business, unaware that it was home to two people who had literally died for love and been reborn for each other. The sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that rivaled even the Arizona sunsets Elena Rodriguez had once watched alone. But Maria Santos was never alone anymore. She had a husband who loved her, a child growing beneath her heart, a community that respected her, and a future that stretched ahead like an unmarked trail full of infinite possibilities. She had chosen adventure over safety, love over law, and trust over fear. And in the end, she had found that sometimes the most practical decision a person could make was to follow their heart straight into the unknown. Because love, she had learned, was the greatest adventure of all. What did you think of Elena and Cord's incredible journey from healer and outlaw to husband and wife? Have you ever taken a leap of faith that completely changed your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories for more incredible tales of love, courage, and second chances on America's frontier. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might just inspire you to choose adventure over safety. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most wanted hearts are the ones most worth winning.